I'm Dr. John Gartner,
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
and welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
This is our 46th episode. We've been at this since April, and it just gets more and more crazy.
Yeah.
Just yesterday, Donald Trump announced Freedom Day. He said it would be the most important date in American history. And he included his own writing that America was being raped by allies and trading partners, and that we would get back the money from friend and foe alike, just in case you thought that JFK was safe from Donald Trump. No, he twisted those words too. It's really extraordinary to see someone with a severe narcissistic personality disorder, malignant narcissism, which, as I always say, accounts for his criminal behavior, compulsive lying, and his need to dominate and control and ultimately destroy anybody that he comes to depend on or see as an adversary. And we have seen it this week, and it has been a nightmare. John?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to talk about Freedom Day and the tariffs in a minute. First, we want to talk about immigration, but you're right to point out that not only is he doing something that is essentially destroying the world economy, but he's grandiosely declaring it to be the most important day in American history, Freedom Day. So talk about a malignant narcissist. I mean, could we come up with a better emblematic expression of a malignant narcissist who, as they're literally destroying the country they lead, and this is not uncommon for these malignant narcissistic leaders to destroy it. I mean, look at, Mao, had a brilliant idea. Mao had a brilliant idea that everybody that China needed steel. So every farmer, every citizen was responsible for somehow smelting steel for the motherland, which meant they couldn't work their crops, and 100 million people or some crazy number that died in a famine. So he's literally destroying his country, killing his people, while grandiosely declaring some, progressive new movement or policy.
Well, so John, this is really. He's told us that he's more important than Lincoln and better for African Americans than Lincoln. So this day is more important than the Emancipation Proclamation and many other much more important dates in American history. I think this will go down as one of the worst mistakes that anyone leading a major country has ever made. That I do think is true.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into the I say it's the economy dementia, Don. We'll get into that in a minute. But I want to start with immigration. I really have a heart for this issue. I've said over and over again that the Trump is the American Hitler, maybe call him the American Hitler wannabe, an aspiring Hitler, and that immigrants are the new Jews, and that the persecution of immigrants is becoming more and more lawless and indiscriminate and ugly. And so I really want to talk about that. We haven't talked about it in a few weeks because we've been so preoccupied, understandably, with the collapse of all these democratic institutions that we're missing the little stories, right, about the people who are being mindlessly persecuted in the shadows. So it came to light in a national way about a man in Maryland, my state, who was snatched and misidentified as a member of an Argentinian gang, and sent to El Salvador, to that horrible black hole, of Calcutta, which is this prison camp where it's known to be incredibly brutal and difficult to survive. And then they realized they made a mistake, or they acknowledged they made a mistake, but they're saying they can't get him back. So let's look at this news article. Quote, administrative error sends a Maryland father to a Salvadoran prison. The Trump administration says that it mistakenly deported an immigrant with protected status. Hey, these things happen, right? But that the courts are somehow powerless to order his return. The Trump administration acknowledged in a court filing Monday that it had grabbed a Maryland father with protected legal status and mistakenly deported him to El Salvador, but said that the U.S. courts lacked the jurisdiction to order his return from the mega prison where he's now locked up. Simon Sandoval Mosheberg Abrego, Garcia's attorney, said he's never seen a case in which the government knowingly deported someone who had already received protected status from an immigration judge. He's asking the court to order the Trump administration to ask for Abrego Garcia's return and, if necessary, even withhold the payment to the Salvadoran government, which it says it's charging the United States $6 million a year to jail U.S. deportees. Trump administration attorneys told the court to dismiss the request on multiple grounds, including, and I love this, that Trump's, quote, primacy in foreign affairs, unquote, outweighs the interest of the Abrego Garcia and his family. So this is the lawlessness of it, right? I mean, even if you could argue they made a good faith mistake, which they didn't, they knowingly deported someone who they knew had a protected status. They don't care. They don't care about the law. They don't care about protected status. They just want to persecute as many immigrants as they can.
And what if he's dead? Why aren't they bringing him back? That prison is so notorious. People die in that prison. So why isn't he coming back?
Well, you know, this guy that they thought was such a tough character, such a gang member, I'd like to show you a picture of him. He's a makeup artist. This is a picture of him applying makeup to some celebrity who's blurred out. What do you think they're going to do to a makeup artist in an El Salvadoran male prison?
What do you think they might already have done?
Yeah.
Monster.
So this is what we're dealing with, right? People snatched off the street, kidnapped, okay, sent to a camp where they are never heard from again. Sound familiar?
You know, and Rachel Maddow is starting to use the term disappeared. People are disappeared, like this guy.
Yeah, right. So I'm just going to go through a series of little cases, Harry, just that didn't make the news, okay, but that people are talking about on TikTok or social media, because I want people to understand this is not an isolated case. This is not an isolated case. Here's a posting from some anonymous person, at least I don't know who he is, in Maine, who's upset because his neighbor has been kidnapped.
One of my neighbors was kidnapped yesterday. Sometimes I speak in metaphor. This isn't that. A local father and husband who lives very close to me was stolen from his family and our community. If it's too much to listen to the rest of this, I understand. Just know this is also a fundraising request for his family. Link in description. His wife of 20 years, who's never spent a day away from him, is sobbing as she makes food and tends their children, wakes up alone, makes coffee without him. I know because as I'm writing this, I'm sitting in her kitchen listening to her. This man was here completely legally, specifically under temporary protected status. It happened like this. His nephew was pulled over for driving 8 miles an hour over the speed limit in a 55 zone, which is to say he was pulled over for driving while brown in Maine. He was on a valid out-of-state license and didn't know that he had to transfer his license within 30 days, which was over. If he'd been white, he wouldn't have been pulled over for doing 63 in a 55, and they would have just told him to go on his way and update his license when he got a chance, but he's Latino. So they gave him a $450 ticket and told him he had to find someone else to drive the car home. He called his uncle, who happily came out, displayed his legal Maine license to the cops. Purely because he speaks Spanish. The cops demanded his papers. They took pictures of everyone on their personal phones, informed dispatch, and dispatch called Border Patrol, who came and kidnapped both the uncle and the guy who was driving's wife. They released the guy who was driving's wife alone at 1 a.m. in the middle of the woods, 2.5 hours north of her home and family. This is a beautiful young woman in her early 20s who speaks no English, thrown into the North Woods alone at night with no idea where she is. They kept the uncle. ICE refused to tell anyone where he was, denied he was in custody for hours, and his son was calling repeatedly and asking, and they said, nope, nobody here. Finally, he was able to call his family, tell him he'd been in custody all along. Now, his family is terrified to go outside and terrified to be at home. This is a legal resident of the U.S. here with proper documentation, kidnapped by a secret police force and taken to an undisclosed location. His family is left without their beloved husband, father, and uncle, and without their primary breadwinner. I wish you could see his wife sobbing and screaming, talking about how in 20 years they've never spent a day apart, how she can't eat because of how horrifying the not knowing is, not knowing where he is, what's being done to him, what their family will do if he's kept in some black site forever, deported to a labor camp in some country he's never been to, how she's terrified to speak about it at all publicly because she fears blowback against her children and family. This is happening to my neighbors in a town of 1,200 people in rural Maine, and most of my neighbors have no idea because the family is too terrified to talk about it. This is happening to your neighbors. People are being disappeared. Families of legal immigrants are being torn apart as we speak.
Well, there you go. People are being
people are
disappeared.
being- Right.
Because they call the police station and they say, you don't know where he is.
It's happening. It's
It's
happening
happening.
here.
It's happening here, right? It's happening, present tense, here. And that really is my point. You know, we're going to talk later about a very good op-ed by Masha Gessen, you know, who's a real expert on totalitarian states. And she's saying the police state is here. The
Right.
police state is here now. If you're a vulnerable person, let's see what, and you know, this person had protected status. They're also harassing people with green cards. Here's another example that you almost certainly haven't heard of.
We have some major news out of New Hampshire where a lawful green card holder was detained by ICE authorities and was violently interrogated in what many are claiming to be, quote, amounting to torture. New Hampshire newspaper, Fabian Schmidt was coming back from Luxembourg. He's a green card holder when his green card was flagged at the Boston. His mom says that he was, quote, violently interrogated at the Logan airport for hours, being stripped naked, put in a cold shower by two officials, and being put back into a chair. She then said Schmidt told her immigration agents pressured him to give up his green card. She said he was placed on a mat in a bright room with other people at the airport with little food or water, suffered sleep deprivation, and was denied access to medication for anxiety and depression. Remember, this is a man who has a green card, can lawfully be in the United States, and has no outstanding warrants. And even if he wasn't a lawful U.S. citizen, you can't do this to people.
They just hate immigrants and they're just going to persecute them and they're just going to keep violating the law. I mean, what reason do they have to torture? And you're not supposed to torture anybody. To torture a man who's just coming home on a plane from Luxembourg.
Well, pressuring him to give up his green card.
Right. Right. And there's a lot of that going on where they're kind of tricking people, you know, into complying with deportation when they actually don't have to by using their authority in other ways to trick or coerce people. I'm going to give another example. Some of you may have heard about this one. A Tufts student, so an undergraduate, co-authored an op-ed critical of Israel, a pro-Palestinian op-ed. She's Turkish by background. And regardless of what
I'm sorry to interrupt. It was not pro-Hamas.
Okay, not pro-Hamas. Okay, that's important. But I was going to say, look, this is one of those issues that even divides families. People feel very passionately about it. They disagree. But I'm thinking about that. Remind me, Harry, who said this about the First Amendment. I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Was that Nathaniel Hale? Or is that, I know he said, I regret I only have one life to give for my country. But anyway, the point is that that's what America's about, right? We'll defend to the death someone's right to have an opinion, express an opinion, even if it's one that we find abhorrent. You know, that's why they let the Nazis march in Skokie, Illinois, you know, right? So let's see her abduction.
NBC News has obtained a video from a homeowner's doorbell camera showing the moment a Tufts doctoral student was arrested by federal law enforcement. Rumisa Ozturk, a Turkish national with a student visa, was on her way to meet up with friends to break her Ramadan fast when she was apprehended by Department of Homeland Security agents and placed in ICE custody, according to her attorney. Again, this is video of it happening. The attorney also told NBC News that nearly 20 hours after her detention, there are still no charges, and the government has not told us where she is. In March 2024, Ozturk co-authored an opinion essay in the Tufts student newspaper criticizing the university's response to demands that it acknowledge the Palestinian genocide and divest from companies with direct or indirect ties to Israel. Again, this is the moment of her arrest. In a statement, Tufts president said the university had no pre-knowledge of this incident and did not share any information with federal authorities prior to the event.
There was a weak response.
I was just going to say that. I was just going to say that, like, oh, we're not the ones who ratted her out. Okay, but are you doing anything to protect her? And by the way, I didn't have time to put this in the show, but I just, I'm formally affiliated with Johns Hopkins. The Baltimore Banner just came out with an article where faculty are being instructed not to interfere with us if I'm making any arrests on campus. So, boo Hopkins. All right, Harry. So I want to get back to this Masha Gessen op-ed. I know that we have a lot of quotes from that essay, but it's an important essay. That's why she's really pulling this together. First of all, if people don't know who Masha Gessen is, well, you probably do if you watch MSNBC, but she truly is one of the great experts on democracy and authoritarianism. Let's see what she has to say about these police state tactics.
Unmarked vans, secret lists, police denunciations. Our police state has arrived. It's the unmarked cars, a friend who grew up under an Argentine dictatorship said. He had watched the video of the Columbia graduate student Mahmoud Khalil's abduction. In the video, which Khalil's wife recorded, she asked for the names of the men in plain clothes who handcuffed her husband. It's the catastrophic interruption of daily life, as when a Tufts University graduate student, Rameza Ozturk, was grabbed on a suburban street by a half-dozen plainclothes agents, most of them masked. The security camera video of that arrest shows Ozturk walking, looking at her phone, perhaps to check the address where she was supposed to meet her friends for dinner that night, when an agent appears in front of her. She says something, asks something, struggling to control her voice, and within seconds, she is handcuffed and placed in an unmarked car. It's the forced mass transports of immigrants. These are not even deportations in the way that we typically think of them. Rather than being sent to their country of origin, Venezuelans were sent to El Salvador, where they are being imprisoned indefinitely without due process. It's the sight of men being marched in formation, their heads shaved, hundreds of people yanked from their individual lives to be reduced to an undifferentiated mass. It's the sight days later of the Secretary of Homeland Security posing against the background of men in cages and threatening more people with the same punishment. It's the growing irrelevance of the law and the helplessness of judges and lawyers. A federal judge ordered flights carrying the Venezuelan men to be turned around and demanded information about the abductees. Another federal judge forbade the government to deport without notice Rasha Alawi, the Brown University Medical School professor who was detained on a return trip to Lebanon. Another judge prohibited Rameza Ozturk from Massachusetts without notice. The executive branch apparently ignored these rulings. It's the shifting goalposts. They're taking not only people who are in the United States without legal status, but also those who are here on a visitor's visa and then also legal permanent residents. They're targeting not only people who have criminal convictions, but also those whom they say they suspect of belonging to a gang, and also those who participated in or supported campus protests, and then also someone like Ozturk, who merely wrote with 3 other people an opinion essay in a student newspaper.
So this is lawless, indiscriminate. They're just kidnapping and disappearing people on the streets, sending many of them to camps where they will meet their death.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of just normalizing this, right? Because we have to get on with everyday life. There's so many other things going on. I just want to point out that this is happening now. And if they're doing this to people, not only undocumented immigrants, but people who have green cards, people of protected status, what makes us think they're not going to start doing it to citizens?
Listen, I have, I although I'm here in Paris for another week or two, I continue my private practice via, online. And today I had 2 patients who were very worried about my return trip. They want me to alert a lawyer to be aware of when I'm coming back in the country in case I don't show up. And I happen to be in love with a lawyer, so I'm hoping that she'll look out for me. But and not only that, but I have what's called global entry. I'm a trusted traveler, which makes it easier for them to pull me aside. So I'm not worried about it. I don't see them seizing legal citizens yet, but who knows? But who knows?
But who knows? Let's hope you're not going to be in for the Luxembourg treatment. The guy got tortured at the airport. Well, and so the question might be, well, come on, John, now you're getting carried away again. This isn't going to happen to us. This isn't going to happen to citizens. Well, let's think about how that could happen. It could happen if he declared martial law. Let's see the next slide. Is Trump preparing to invoke the Insurrection Act? Signs are pointing that way. A joint Department of Defense and Homeland Security report will soon recommend whether or not to invoke the Insurrection Act over illegal migration. The clock is ticking down on a crucial but little noticed part of President Donald Trump's first round of executive orders, the one tasking the secretaries of the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security to submit a joint report within 90 days recommending whether to invoke the Insurrection Act. Many of us are now holding our collective breath, knowing that the report and what it contains could put us on a slippery slope towards unchecked presidential powers under a man with an affinity for iron-fisted dictators. So a lot of people are saying this is the play. He's going to declare martial law, at least in certain areas, based on this Insurrection Act, which he's going to be declaring in 90 days. So at that point, they could kidnap citizens. It's martial law.
Well, and of course, there's a Congress that won't do anything to stop him. Mike Johnson is completely beholden to him, has colluded with him in every way he can. That little self-righteous jerk.
Yeah. I agree with you. Total contempt for him. So that's what's going on in immigration. We're at the police state level. Now let's turn to the economy. Of course, it was James Carville who famously advised the Bill Clinton campaign with the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid." So I have to say, it's the economy, Dementia Don, because what he's doing is insane. Is destroying the world economy. If all the stock markets are crashing, and he really is demented, folks. We've been telling you this. We've been warning you about this. He's evil and he's demented. Okay, but the demented part doesn't come out as much now because he's not as much in the public eye. He's not doing these long rallies. But listen to how cognitively impaired, how thin, how primitive his thought processes are. This is on Liberation Day, and he's helping us to understand about groceries.
But likewise, an old-fashioned term that we use, groceries. I used it in the campaign. It's such an old-fashioned term, but a beautiful term, groceries. It sort of says a bag with different things in it. Groceries went through the roof. And I campaigned on that. I talked about the word groceries for a lot.
It's all about the word groceries, right? He can't get to the point of dealing with the prices of groceries. It's like groceries, funny word. Yeah, groceries, the things you put in the brown bag. Yeah, I talked about groceries. I ran on groceries. So it's a word.
And that's where the thought ends.
Yeah, that's where the thought ends. It's a word. It's a beautiful word, John, and you put things in a bag. You put things in a bag.
People
don't use that word anymore, but yes, they do. But people don't use that word anymore. But it used to be a thing. Groceries used to be a thing.
Yeah, now Eddie brought it back.
He brought it back.
The prices are going up.
Right.
And
of course.
They threw out Biden because of the inflation. Wait till they see the prices going up on everything. He's put tariffs on the world.
Right. No, it's they're going to go through the roof. The prices are going to go through the roof. Actually, that reminds me of an old Saturday Night Live routine that you and I saw in the 80s when was it the guy from Massachusetts who lost? The caucus, right? He kept claiming he wasn't going to raise taxes, and Bush kept claiming he was. And then the Saturday Night Live video, they say, "But Dukakis, were you really going to raise taxes after you've been like through the roof?" Well,
and in that skit, Willie Horton shows up.
Oh yeah, right. And then Willie Horton shows up in the skit. Right, we're really marking
Best
our
thing ever.
Now. Yeah, now Willie Horton is the Willie Horton campaign strategy is actually really what they, to some extent, won on, right? They demonized Willie Horton, and they said, if you vote for the Democrats, right, these angry black men running amok are going to threaten you. Well, basically, he said the same thing about immigrants. So talking about his dementia, one of the things that happens when you're demented is you forget things, like forgetting to sign the most important executive order in history.
Good afternoon, y'all. We have two documents prepared for the president's signature today. One closes what's referred to as the de minimis loophole.
Well, I guess the demented old grandpa forgot to sign the law that was going to crash the entire world's economy. I mean, this is crazy, man. We've got a crazy, demented lunatic at the wheel, driving the entire world economy into a ditch. You can't make this stuff up. So let's also look at something else that shows how he really is not in reality. Okay, let's look at this cover. Mad King. Trump baffles observers by suggesting that he'll tariff illegal drugs. That's right. He said several times that he's going to put a big tariff on all the fentanyl coming illegally from Canada. How are you going to put a tariff on contraband that's being smuggled?
Listen, he can tariff the black markets if he wants, I guess.
Because he can tariff anybody. He's a big tough guy. He can tariff anybody. And really
it's these slippages. You see them over and over again.
Over and over again, right? I mean, these are not, they're small, but they're not small. You know what I mean? They're really showing how thin his cognitive processes are, that even as he's directing this world destruction, he kind of only understands half of what's going on. And this is just a kind of funny little thing. So part of that chart that he showed, which, by the way, the chart was full of lies. That was one of the things that I don't know why people are shocked, but it was supposed to be a chart that showed this is how much tariffs all these other countries are putting on us. And see, we're just putting a fraction of the tariffs on them that they're putting on us because we're just getting back, and all the numbers were lies. All the numbers were lies. So the whole chart was crazy. But one of the countries that has been named, okay, that's going to be tariffed is the Heard and McDonald Islands. And what you may not have heard of the Heard McDonald Islands, and there's a reason for that, they're uninhabited. Well, not entirely. Wait, not entirely. There's a lot of penguins who live there.
Well, okay, there you go.
Breaking. A massive protest is now on the Heard and McDonald Islands after Trump announced a 10% retaliatory tariff on the islands. For those of you who are just listening, it's a picture of thousands of penguins wandering around on the island.
Yeah, no, they're checking their bank accounts.
they're scrubbing their social media to make sure they're not saying anything bad about Trump. But actually, even though they're only penguins, like whack, whack, Trump bad, whack, whack, Trump sucks. Whack. I actually don't know how penguins sound. That's my penguin.
You're sounding like Burgess Meredith doing the penguin.
Right. All right, but more serious. But so more seriously, let's hear what economists and money men are saying. So we've talked about how CNBC is kind of a pro-Republican, pro-business sort of network, but all of those, as is the Wall Street Journal, but all of those money people are losing their minds over what Trump is doing. Let's hear what
of course they are.
They're just losing their minds over it, as they should, that this is the appropriate amount of alarm that they're showing. Let's hear what the CNBC anchor has to say about it.
Market reaction after hours, I've never seen anything like it. This, I think fair to say, is worse than the worst case scenario.
Wasn't like a 3% drop in the market? I mean, it's huge.
There's just trillions of wealth just disappearing, just gone.
Like a lot of academics, my retirement fund is managed by TIA, which is a big annuity investment firm.
Sure.
I tried to get into my account, and I got this note saying, to get into your account, you need to give a call, which has never happened before. I mean, in all the 25 years.
They're being flooded. They're being flooded.
You're being flooded. The websites have crashed.
Right. Well, I don't want to make anyone jealous, but I did follow my own advice and sell half of my stocks in mid-March. And because I saw this coming. Now, I do tend to see things a little far in the distance, and they may be further away than they look, because I sold all my stocks when Trump was elected the first time. Because I was sure he was going to destroy the economy. So I literally missed the entire Trump bump in the stock market. So literally all of my contemporaries, all of my peers are like one economic level above me because of my not being in the market for those 4 years. It would be ironic if I did it then and then didn't do it now. And this time it's for real. I think this time it's for real.
Well, John, just so that we don't get sued for your giving financial advice, I haven't sold any of my stocks. I'm leaving them right where they are. So we cancel each other out. It will be good.
Well, past performance is no predictor of future performance, because last time I did it, I got screwed. So we'll see. We'll see. But I mean, to be honest, and listen, one of the things is we are men of a certain age. And actually, they do recommend that people in their 60s take some of the money out of the market, separate from any market timing, except in terms of your asset allocation, that you put a little more in something stable, because you don't have as much time for it to go up and down and up. That's all I'm saying. But in this case, if you really see choppy waters ahead, it makes sense to take some cover. In any case, obviously, I'm not the only person thinking that way, because you can't even get through to TIA crap. I mean, you think those people are calling to buy?
If you keep this up, we're gonna have to change the show to shrinking assets.
Yeah, well, they are.
Keep going. We can't give financial advice. We just can't. Keep going.
We can't give financial advice. Well, here's someone who can give financial advice. Okay. I think you guys know Kramer, Manic Kramer. Yeah, he's freaking out about these tariffs.
Well, yeah.
BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, who writes an annual chairman's letter required reading for anyone in the markets, wrote some fateful words today. Quote, I hear it from nearly every client, nearly every leader, nearly every person I talk to. They're more anxious about the economy than any time in recent memory, end quote. I come back and say, I believe that. I believe that wholeheartedly. But let's think about what that really means for you and me. We have declining inflation, except the president's putting on inflationary tariffs. We have incredibly low unemployment, except where it's caused by the Trump administration. We have a market that was doing extremely well last year until the Trump administration showed a level of uncertainty that I can't recall any time since, are you ready, ski daddy, Jimmy Carter, which is the last time people were really worried about inflation, about stagflation, okay? Back then, stagflation was real. Now, Jimmy Carter, curious benchmark, break out the cardigan sweater. I know it's a brutal comparison. You think I did it idly? I cannot think of another president in my lifetime who knocked down the stock market simply by opening his mouth than Jimmy Carter. Eureka, I have found him.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
No, I mean, and Jim Cramer, can be a bit of an asshole, but but no, he's right. Look, the Wall Street Journal has had negative editorials every day, and the theme is this is the stupidest trade war in history.
Right.
It's
In
crazy. And
Right.
and Trump believes in tariffs. And as we talked about last week, and just to get back to our expertise as psychologists, John, not as financial advisors, as clinical psychologists, we've been noticing that the only thing Trump really ever does is extort people. That is, it's not
Right.
transactional. It's, as David Brooks said, it's not about making a deal. It's
Right.
about pressuring somebody with threats to do what he wants. And that's how he's using the tariffs. These are not done to negotiate new things. They're not done to protect certain industries. It's done to take his baseball bat and crack the heads open of all of our friends and our allies, or as he said, friends and foe alike.
Right.
That is psychopathology, my friends. You've got to think of it that way, because that's what it is.
And our roster of the friend to foe ratio is going down rapidly. Well, talk about other people who know what they're talking about. Let's see what the CEOs, a survey of CEOs, is saying about the economy. Recession is coming before the end of 2025. Generally pessimistic corporate CFOs say, NBC survey. And key points, the economy will enter a recession in the second half of 2025, according to a majority of chief financial officers responding to the quarterly CNBC CFO Council survey. CFOs describe themselves as generally pessimistic on the overall state of the U.S. economy and uncertain about the stock market. 95% of CFOs said policy is impacting their ability to make business decisions. And many said that while Trump is delivering on promises, his administration's approach is too chaotic, disruptive, and extreme for businesses to navigate effectively. Wow. Who would have thought he would be disruptive and chaotic? Who saw that one coming? Delivering on his promises, you morons.
And this time with no one to keep him in line. No generals, no Jamie Dimon, no one to keep, or Stephen Mnuchin, for God's sakes, who didn't want him to put up as many tariffs as he even did back then. He is without any control. He is without self-regulation, and he's a malignant narcissist, and he's suffering from cognitive decline.
Right.
What a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, that's absolutely the worst case scenario. And I just want to show a quick tweet from Ann Applebaum, who's a famous writer and foreign policy expert, just to put this all in perspective. So where we're going. America is spinning quickly in the direction of Hungarian populism, Hungarian politics, and Hungarian justice. That means Hungarian stagnation, Hungarian corruption, and Hungarian poverty lie in our future too. Totalitarian states are not rich countries.
No.
Because the great leader is sucking all the wealth, right, out of the country and doing nothing to promote growth and wealth among the people. So if you're going to vote for totalitarian justice and totalitarian courts, you're going to get totalitarian economics.
And, it's funny because China 20 years ago, when it was really on the rise, had found a way to let a free market happen in China with creativity, with more and more freedoms. That's why it was doing better. And then Xi Jinping, what he did was to strangle it and to watch everybody on social media and begin to control what people are doing. And that's why their economy is also tanking. You're right. Authoritarianism is not efficient, nor is it liberal in the sense of providing liberty.
Right. And, you said about the lack of guardrails. I think that you mentioned, we talked about this earlier, there are 4 senators. Wow, 4 senators who are trying to oppose just the tariffs on Canada, right? And that's taking a brave step to try to be a mild guardrail on him, right? And actually, this is something that's interesting. I would say this may be the first time in my lifetime that I've agreed with Rand Paul. Here, what Rand Paul has to say about the tariffs.
Rand Paul said that the tariffs could cause a recession and have a major political impact. Watch.
Tariffs have also led to political decimation. When McKinley most famously put tariffs on in 1890, they lost 50% of their seats in the next election. When Hott Smolley put on their tariff in the early 1930s, we lost the House and the Senate for 60 years. So they're not only bad economically, they're bad politically.
So there you go. I didn't know Rand Paul was a student of history, but there it is.
Well, as a libertarian, he's very into into that kind of free market policy, and he's also right. It's I wanted just to explain, if I can, that this issue about the tariffs and those 4 Republican senators. I think it was Collin, Murkowski, McConnell, and I forget the 4th one. I'm sure our audience will let us know. But what happened was when Donald Trump came into office, he signed a declaration of an economic emergency. An economic emergency for an economy that The Economist magazine, not exactly a bastion of liberal ideas, called our economy the envy of the world. So there was no basis for the economic emergency, but that gives Trump sweeping powers to do whatever he wants with tariffs. Now, and I got this from Rachel Maddow, who
I think he thought it was to create a state of emergency. Maybe he misunderstood. Maybe he thought that was what his job was.
I think he knew exactly what he was doing. And besides, he has to call whatever Biden did a disaster. He did the same thing with Obama. So anyway, so he declares a state of emergency. Now we can put in tariffs whenever he wants, but he can be stopped by Congress. And in fact, there were 4 Republican senators who joined the Democratic senators in the Senate to take away Trump's ability to set tariffs on Canada, not on the rest of the world, but on Canada. But Mike Johnson, that little prig, he did something rather brilliant, which is he declared the entire session of Congress as one day. All these months, one day. And that way, you can suggest a bill like that, but it has to come up for discussion on subsequent days. But there are no subsequent days because the entire term is one day. And that is keeping the House, which would probably pass a bill that would then connect with the Senate bill. Of course, Trump would veto it. But it stops them from passing this. And this is a collusion of Mike Johnson selling out the legislative branch for Trump. And whenever I see him on television talking in that very reasonable way, like, I'm Mike Johnson and I'll do anything. I'm just being reasonable. I'm just very religious. And I have an app so that if I masturbate with pornography and my son does, we know that's true. But he's really doing terrible things. Terrible things.
Well, you say that. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Look, we have a guest coming up who's a political operative and commentator, and if the elections are allowed to go forward in 26, the off years, he sees a real overturning of the House, and that is when we can put a break, I hope, on this president, at least in some ways.
Because you say that if Johnson hadn't pulled that move, that the Congress would, the House would go along with the Senate's revoking of his tariff ability. But listen to what Mike Johnson had to say about tariffs.
Are you concerned about the impact of these tariffs on Americans if there are higher prices? Isn't the president to blame for that if there are?
No, I don't know if you watched that ceremony, but there was a lot of great energy in the Rose Garden, and we're really excited about the president's vision. You shouldn't doubt it. We shouldn't, because he delivered in the first administration, as he rightly noted, after the first 2 years, the first Trump administration, we had the greatest economy in the history of the world, not the U.S., the world. And that's because his vision led us through that. Regulatory reform, regulatory reduction, tax cuts, and the rest of his policies did it. Tariffs is a big part of that. I think if you poll, and there'll be polling, I'm sure, the president's explanation of reciprocal tariff policy it's just common sense. I think most American people understand it's not fair.
Because it's just very reasonable. And I'll just bend over. I'll let Trump do anything to me he wants, because I might even enjoy it, because I'll just do it and I'll just rationalize anything he says.
Yeah, I think Mike Johnson had the understanding that if he assumed the position of Speaker of the House, he had to assume the position.
I think he's doing it. I think that's why he bends over so much. I think that's why he's there with Trump. Exactly. I hate him so much. I'm sorry, guys. I don't mean to. I just
hate him so much. That's okay.
I hate him so much.
The crime
he's
of
such
passion.
a self-righteous little prick. Let's keep going.
And what you said about the procedural kind of sleight of hand, the declaring a state of emergency, making Congress one day, there's no technicality, there's no rule that Republicans will not abuse, right?
Exactly.
And they're actually quite good at it. They're really creative at finding a way of bending a rule to actually use it for the opposite of what it was intended to do. But it's such a contrast to me, because I just also can't get over how often the Democrats, when they had power, right? We're all old enough to remember that, right? When the Democrats had power, they didn't use the rules and the power they had because they were hyper moral about following the rules. For example, the example that always bugs me, Biden and Harris ran on increasing the minimum wage. Congress blocked them from passing any laws, and they had to put everything in the budget reconciliation, if you remember that, to pass anything. One of the things they put in there was raising the national minimum wage. It was tied 50-50, and Kamala Harris had the chance to break the tie and award an increased minimum wage to like 20 million Americans, something crazy like that, to really lift 20 million Americans or 30 million Americans out of poverty. And she elected not to do it. Why? Because the Senate parliamentarian objected and said that raising the minimum wage really didn't fit in a budget reconciliation bill because it wasn't technically an economic policy, which, by the way, it is. But also, who cares? Who cares?
Yeah, let the Supreme Court strike it down 6 months later, right? That's what the Republicans do. That's what the Republicans do. We'll let the Supreme Court handle it a year from now.
Right. We'll just do whatever we want and try to stop it. And here it's like, well, we're not going to do what we want. We're not going to do what we campaigned on. We're not going to help the working people. And after all, it's the working people that threw them out, right? It was this economic uncertainty for people who were low wage, right? These were the forgotten people. These were the people who really did turn out for Trump because they have been left behind in the global economy. And so they actually had a legitimate beef. You had a chance just to raise your hand, like just to physically raise your hand, raise your little pinky, okay? And you could have lifted tens of millions of Americans out of poverty. And they didn't do it.
It's what you've been saying, though. Biden and at that time, Kamala Harris, and even during the campaign, they're 20th century politicians in the 21st century. You can't do that. You push hard, you get that through reconciliation, and the Supreme Court knocks it down 6 months later, fine. You've still fought for the working class. So you still take the win. And the Republicans have learned this a long time ago.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're moving on to a new section that I call Character is Destiny. And actually, Harry, I have to give you credit. There's a couple of things that have happened in the news that kind of support what you've been talking about and predicting, because you've been saying that because Trump is incapable of having a stable alliance with anyone, right? Because of
Right.
his impulse to dominate and destroy, which is why to know him is to hate him, and he has no friends. That he's creating some distance now between himself and Elon Musk, and even Vladimir Putin. Let's look at that Politico cover. Trump tells Inner Circle that Musk will leave soon. The president is pleased with Elon Musk, but the decision comes as the tech mogul increasingly looks like a political liability. So that's part of what you were predicting.
It was. No, Trump doesn't stick with anybody. Mm-hmm. And when we talked about his relationship with Putin, what you were saying was he's a Russian asset, and you very, very intelligently asked me what would he be do differently if he weren't a Russian asset, and I couldn't answer on one of our shows. But last week, and watching him with Zelensky in the Oval Office, where he was clearly trying to make a deal, and then even now he's on the verge of a deal that he thinks he's on the verge of a deal that would get all of this rare earth metals and minerals and even gas, petroleum gas, etc., from Ukraine. Putin is, of course, not going along with a ceasefire. He's not going along with a peace deal. And Trump is furious because Putin is making Trump look bad. Trump promised he could get this done in a day. Well, now it's like 2.5 months, almost 3 months, and it's not happening. And Putin's not going to say yes. And now Trump is threatening, well, we're going to look at it in a moment, but threatening what is called secondary tariffs, which is not the same thing as reciprocal tariffs, secondary. But before we get to that, did you want to just show the, what happened to poor Musk in Wisconsin? He gave out millions of dollars to people. Musk was trying to get this conservative Supreme Court judge elected in Wisconsin, and he put all this money into it, and he went up, he's giving money. Remember, he gave millions to voters and stuff. And
$100 million he spent.
Wow. And that guy lost by 10 points. And I saw this on Facebook, and I had to share it with you.
Well, for those of you who are just listening, it's a picture of a Tesla being crushed by a giant Swiss cheese.
Because Wisconsin is the cheese state, cheese.
Exactly. If you ever watch the Green Bay Packers, they've all got them on their heads, the pieces of cheese. one of those big pieces of cheese. Well, and this is really interesting, though. The thing about Putin is really very, very interesting. And the other thing that you pointed out about the deal when we spoke earlier was that the deal involved America winning all these rare earth mineral rights. So it was sort of a windfall of natural resources for us. And as you pointed out, that's not Putin's plan. He wants all those natural resources for himself.
Exactly.
So actually, this is the first time we have seen any daylight between Trump and Putin.
And so my argument is not that he was an asset, but that he admired Putin, idealized him, and allied with him, and gave the Russian talking points, and sided with Putin, and agreed that Ukraine somehow started the war. Mm-hmm. But Trump will attack you, will reject you the moment you make him look weak. Mm-hmm. And you know what Trump was saying to Zelensky, and in that Oval Office meeting, which the first hour went extremely well before Vance poked Trump to get him to attack Zelensky, he was saying, we won't really need that much security presence because we're going to be there digging up the minerals. We're going to be there. All of our companies are going to be busy working there. So of course Russia won't attack because we'll be there. Well, you can imagine how Putin felt about that.
Yeah.
And so Putin is dragging his feet, and Trump knows it. And so on Meet the Press, he had an interview with Kristen Welker, and before the show started, he called Kristen Welker and told her that he was really pissed off at Putin, and that he was considering secondary tariffs. Now, on the panel was, I think, the great Andrea Mitchell, who is just a wonderful, wise and old pro and very eloquent. She recently stepped down from her daily MSNBC show, but she's still incredible. And this is her take on what happened with that phone call to Kristen Welker.
And when you get to Russia, the news that the president made with you last night and again today, he's pivoting on Vladimir Putin for the first time. And the question that I have is, are they going to back down on the revised draft of that minerals agreement, which I've seen it, it's 55 pages, and basically it would indenture Ukraine forever. The U.S. would control it out of a Delaware corporation and would have full say over all the members of this group, and it would be oil and gas as well as minerals. And there's no way that Zelensky could ever sign this, but he's so nervous about again appearing to oppose it. So this is the first acknowledgement by Donald Trump of any pressure on Russia.
It is extraordinary. Angry and pissed off, he says.
Now, this is really interesting. This is the pivot, because if Trump is going to be humiliated by Putin, if Putin makes him look weak, like he can't bring peace, get all those resources, and win the Nobel Peace Prize, which he wants because Obama got one. Right. Yeah, that's while getting his face carved on Mount Rushmore, because he's an egomaniac. He's going to turn on Putin. And if John, did you have anything to say, or should I go into the tariffs thing?
We'll go into the tariffs thing. Well, let me just say this. I think that this is really interesting, and it does support your psychological point, right? That's why I said character is destiny. In other words, this alliance is working, folks. I mean, they've successfully taken over the world, but it's like the mobster film. Then after the heist, then they start killing each other for the money. So they're on the same team. When they're robbing the Lufthansa of the millions, Lufthansa air flight. Remember that caper from the 70s that took millions of dollars, and then it's in Goodfellas they actually show that when they robbed the plane, but then Robert De Niro starts killing all his co-conspirators. So there's a kind of gangland honor among thieves. So you're right. In some ways, I don't think he saw himself as an asset. He saw himself as an ally, but on the same team, part of the same criminal conspiracy. But those types of people eventually do tend to turn on each other, and that's because it's their character.
Well, so now I wouldn't agree that they took over the world. What I would say is that Putin has been incredibly aggressive with Ukraine. Trump then moved towards him by alienating NATO and basically kicking them to the curb, right?
Yeah.
And now putting tariffs on everybody. Yeah. So Putin has gotten some of what he wants, which is America separating from NATO. Although NATO is now getting very strong and supporting each other in a way that they wouldn't have if Trump hadn't pissed all over them. But it's not like they've divided up the world yet, because now Trump wants Ukraine. And Putin wanted Ukraine. Okay?
Right.
But for Trump not to get rooted, if you don't give Trump what he wants, he gets mad, and there's no loyalty to anyone. Even if he idealized Putin, he is not going to tolerate being humiliated by anyone. And
now they're having a turf battle. Well, this sort of reminds me of the allegory, which, this character is Destiny Point, about the scorpion and the frog. You probably know this one. Maybe a lot of people in the audience do too. So a scorpion says to a frog, "Look, I need to get across the river. Can you swim me across?" And the frog says, "Well, no way. You'll sting me and I'll die. I'm not going to do that. I'm not stupid." And the scorpion says, "Well, think about this. If I sting you while we're going across the river, I'm going to die too." Frog thinks about it and goes, "Yeah, okay, you're right. That makes sense. Okay, fine, hop on." And they're swimming halfway across the river, and then the scorpion stings him. And then as they're both drowning, the frog says, "What are you doing?" And the scorpion, "Now we're both going to die." And the scorpion says, I know, but I'm a scorpion. It's his nature. He can't help it. And as a malignant narcissist, this is his nature. Even when it hurts him, he can't help it.
Listen, as a spokesperson for mental health.
Yeah.
The healthier someone is, the less character is destiny, the more the possibilities of choice, of changing your mind, of adjusting your needs, of having empathy for the other person that you love or that you're in alliance with or you're working with. That the healthier you are, the more flexible, the more every moment is a chance to decide what you want to do. The more disturbed you are, the more traumatized you were as a young child, the more rigidly you have to defend your grandiosity for fear of feeling like you're nothing. That's how I see Trump. Then character is destiny. Then you can't change it.
Yeah. No, that's a very, very good point. The healthier you are, the more reality-based you are. So the more reality becomes your destiny, not just your program.
And all the politicians or public figures that we admire as healthy, I don't know, it's Tom Hanks or or Jimmy Carter or other people. You see them over a lifetime being flexible, learning, changing their points of view, trying new things. That's part of being alive in a healthy way to the world. The more disturbed you are, the less you can see the world for how it is, the more you're just projecting on it and reenacting stuff over and over again.
It's really, really an excellent point.
Thank you. And so in this other clip with the great Andrea Mitchell, she explains what secondary tariffs are. And man, I've been reading up on this stuff and I was watching stuff. No one explained it like this. Here's what she says about secondary tariffs on Russia.
Andrea, the word of the week is tariffs. Tariffs here, tariffs potentially for Iran, potentially for Russia.
Secondary tariffs for Russia, and secondary tariffs mean that he would be tariffing Turkey, India, China, those who buy the Russian oil, which is sanctioned under UN resolutions. So that is really unusual for him to be saying that. I was surprised that he initially said to you that they would be that he didn't care if they would be raising prices. With the volatility of the markets and his sticking to tariffs, it shows you how wedded he is to tariffs because he's never ignored the markets. And what's happening is consumer confidence is down and inflation's up.
If he does those on Russia, he is choking Putin with his own hands like this. Because the only way that Putin has survived the sanctions was all these other people buying the oil from him.
Well, you see, Harry, this is the problem with gangsters. This is the problem with gangsters. Stalin and Hitler, they're such great friends. They're such great friends. Let's enslave the world together. Let's do it. Yay. Okay. Until that was Tuesday, but now on Thursday, let's invade Russia.
There's a wonderful novel by Solzhenitsyn, which I urge everyone to read, called The First Circle. It's a great, great novel. Can't stop reading it. And it's about a prison camp in Moscow with scientists that Stalin has put into prison. But Solzhenitsyn writes about Stalin and what he's thinking. And as he's getting ready for meeting Stalin's going, the guy I really liked was Hitler. Not there. There was a guy who had some spunk. It's really fantastic. All right. Can we go on? Should we go on to resistors?
Yes. Now let's talk about our resistors of the week. We actually have several of them. One thing I want to say is I know that I have been very hard on the Democrats, but recently I've been a little less hard on them, only because people keep saying, "Well, what are the Democrats doing? What are they doing? What are they doing?" And the honest truth is, things have gone so badly, that at this point they really have no power. I mean, they literally have no power. There's nothing they can do, except the only power they still have is the power of their voice. And Cory Booker did something very, I think, heroic this week, which is that he broke the record for a filibuster. He stood on the Senate floor for 25 hours to inveigh against the Trump administration. So here is someone, one man, one senator, doing what he can, right, to get the word out.
And let me just set this up. One way that Booker organized his, it's not technically a filibuster, but he held the floor for 25 hours, was that he begins by talking about John Lewis. And he talks about John Lewis several times in the course of his long speech. And John and I, we've been wondering, where's Kamala Harris? Why isn't someone running for president now? Why isn't someone talking every day against Trump? And at least for me, and John too, I think, we saw Cory Booker starting to get that idea. Why can't you just take the microphone and force people to listen to you? So as he starts, I just want you to know he had just mentioned John Lewis before this first clip we're going to show you.
And so I start tonight thinking about him. I've been thinking about him a lot during these last 71 days. Get in good trouble, necessary trouble, help redeem the soul of America, and had to ask myself, if he's my hero, how am I living up to his words? I think Democrats and Republicans have made a lot of mistakes. No side has a monopoly on the truth. No side has been perfect servants of this country. But what's happened in the last 71 days is a patent demonstration of a time where John Lewis's call to everyone has, I think, become more urgent and more pressing. And if I think it's a call for our country, I have to ask myself how I'm living these words. So tonight, I rise with the intention of getting in some good trouble. I rise with the intention of disrupting the normal business of the United States Senate for as long as I am physically able. I rise tonight because I believe sincerely that our country is in crisis. And I believe that not in a partisan sense, because so many of the people that have been reaching out to my office in pain, in fear, having their lives upended, so many of them identify themselves as Republicans. Indeed, conversations from in this body to in this building to across my state and recently in a travel across the country, Republicans as well as Democrats are talking to me about what they feel is a sense of dread about a growing crisis, or what they point to about what is going wrong, that bedrock commitments in our country that both sides rely on, that people from all backgrounds rely on, those bedrock commitments are being broken. Unnecessary hardships are being borne by Americans of all backgrounds. And institutions which are special in America, which are precious, which are unique in our country, are being recklessly, and I would say even unconstitutionally affected, attacked, and even shattered.
Well, I hope he keeps talking.
Me too. I wanted to show you guys one more clip because it's just such a great story, and you probably don't know it. And someone I know pointed me to it, so I went and found it on the tapes. Going back to John Lewis and how John Lewis indirectly greatly affected the life of Cory Booker. So here's the story.
But I want to explain why I started this whole 24 hours talking about John Lewis and good trouble. 60 years ago, when he was on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, he shook New Jersey as he shook the nation. When Bloody Sunday happened, there was a white guy on a couch in New Jersey who was watching TV and was so shaken. This lawyer said, I got to go to Alabama. He realized he couldn't afford a plane ticket. So this man slumped back down on his couch, and then he said, at a moral moment in America, I'm not going to let my inability to do everything undermine my determination to do something different. And he got up and said, okay, it was a meager calculation, but it was different. I can afford 1 hour a month of pro bono work. And he called around and he found this woman named Lee Porter, who was heading up an organization called the Fair Housing Council, and said, can you use a lawyer? And she's like, hallelujah, thank you, Jesus. Yeah, we need some help. And they worked together and they designed a sting operation where they would send black families in areas of New Jersey that would not sell homes to black people, where usually the best public schools were, And if they were told the house was sold, they'd send a white couple behind them to expose that the house was still for sale and expose all of this. Well, they had a lot of success getting things written about the severe housing discrimination in my state. And he said that after about 4 years, I got this case file of a black family trying to move to New Jersey, and they were frustrated because every time they look at homes in the places with the best public schools, which happen to be white communities, they said they couldn't find a home. So they did the sting operation. They sent the black couple in. They were told this incredible house was not for sale. They loved the house. So when the white couple went, they just threw in a bid to see if it would be accepted. The bid was accepted. Papers were drawn up on the day of the closing. The white couple did not show up. The black man did. Lawyer Marty Friedman marched in, confronted the real estate agent. You would think 1969, a year after the Fair Housing Act, that he would capitulate, but he didn't. This lawyer gets up so angry, this real estate agent gets up so angry, he punches the lawyer in the face and sings a Doberman pinscher on the black guy. They get out of there shaken up, and they start writing letters back and forth. The good owners of the home found out what was going on. They were so aghast. They said, let us sell the house directly to the black family. The black family moved in. And 43 years later, the baby from that family became the 4th popularly elected black senator in our country, me.
Yeah, very inspiring story.
He's so great, man. I've always liked him. I remember when he was mayor of Newark, wasn't it? He was so incredible. And let's see if he can maintain the stage.
I thought he did a good job in the debates, the presidential debates. I thought he was a very strong candidate. Well, I want to introduce another congressional resistor, one that I'm not familiar with. He's a congressman from California named Robert Garcia. Here's what he's saying to his constituents at the town hall about how he's going to fight the Trump administration. I found it inspiring.
And I'll tell you this: I swear on my mother and my family on this one thing, that I don't care. You can arrest me, but I will never stop pushing back and fighting Elon Musk and Donald Trump until you throw me in Guantanamo Bay. I promise you that. I promise you that. Promise you that. I could care less. And I think that's okay. No. Look, I think if you are right now in Congress and you're not, this is the moment. If you are not in Congress and you're not willing to stand up and understand that our democracy and everything that we love about this country is actually in danger, then step away for someone that is willing to do that. Step away for someone that is willing to do that.
There's a fighter.
Yep. Pretty great.
So the last resistor I want to talk about is actually the president of my alma mater, Princeton. And you would think that graduating from Princeton would be something that I was proud of. And for a large part of my life, I was. But during the Trump years, I became extremely disenchanted with my university, primarily because it was doing nothing. We were doing nothing to stop Trump. Our motto, Princeton's motto, is in the nation's service. That's supposedly our raison d'etre. And for Harvard, it's veritas, truth. I always like that one better, but we're in the nation's service. Okay. This is a true story. And if there's anybody from my class listening, the class of 79, I was repeatedly warned and almost threatened with expulsion from the class of 1979 Facebook group. This is a true story, okay? Because I kept posting political stuff and screaming at everybody, we've got to do something. Of course, that sounds like me, doesn't it? That's the kind of thing I would do. And the head of the group would keep messaging me saying, John, I get it. I share your politics, but That's not what this group is for. That's not what this group is about. No, what it was about is people posting stupid pictures of themselves in ridiculously unflattering black and orange costumes at reunions, bragging about how wonderful it was that they went to Princeton. And, a lot of these people, like George Bush, were born on second base and thought they hit a double, just so proud of themselves. Anyway, so it really rubbed me the wrong way. And of course, what I tend to do in those situations is to be abrasive, which is what I was. But I want to take Harry. For those who were just listening, Harry's like shaking his head. Yes, yes, yes. We all know this. Yes, it's a matter of public record. Okay, especially for those who know you. But actually, with this Columbia settlement, the president of Princeton has taken step forward. He wrote an article in The Atlantic. And, one of the things we've been saying, right, is the reason these institutions are falling is because they're picking people off, right? And so instead of, the law firms sticking together and saying, we're not going to take this, he's picking off one by one. Well, he may be doing the same thing with the universities. Columbia has, capitulated. Who's going to be next? And so he wrote a very good article in The Atlantic about it. And here he is being interviewed about this.
I want to start with news that we're both learning about right now, I believe, which is that Columbia University seems to have agreed to many of the demands from the Trump administration in the hope of keeping that $400 million in research. What's your response?
Let me say, first of all, I have huge respect for Columbia University and tremendous respect for their president, Dr. Katrina Armstrong. So I don't want to be in the position of second guessing a peer institution, particularly under circumstances where I've just learned about the agreement. What I will say is this: academic freedom is a fundamental principle of universities, has to be protected. And so I have concerns if universities make concessions about that. And I think once you make concessions once, it's hard not to make them again. So that would be a framework that I would bring to this decision at any American university.
In an essay in The Atlantic now, you refer to what's going on as an assault on academic freedom. You write, the attack on Columbia is a radical threat to scholarly excellence and to America's leadership in research. Tell us, what do you see going on and how big is that threat right now?
Well, what I would say is this: America's research universities are the best in the world. I think they are also the best that they have ever been. If you look back at American history, two of the things that have been critical to making American universities as strong as they are academic freedom. That is the right of universities to make decisions about how to constitute academic departments, and the right of faculty, scholars, and scholarly disciplines to make judgments about what counts as quality. That's one of the key factors. And the second is the partnership with the government that has benefited the American people tremendously by producing these great research universities. Right now, when you see that government partnership and the government funding being used in ways to kind of force concessions from universities around academic freedom, it threatens the strength of those institutions by undermining the ability of scholars to insist on the right standards of excellence.
Wow, no, he's terrific. And my alma mater is Columbia University, and I've been so disappointed and ashamed in their capitulating to Trump, just like those law firms. And and I'm hoping my present employer, Cornell University, will hold fast. Because
so hats off to President Eisgruber of Princeton. Okay, but there are consequences to standing up to Trump. Can we see that next article? Trump pauses dozens of federal grants to Princeton. The Trump administration has sought to punish universities financially, saying they have not done enough to combat anti-Semitism or comply with other administration priorities. According to Princeton's most recent financial report, the university received more than $455 million through government grants and contracts during the fiscal year that ended in June 2024. That money accounted for roughly 18% of the university's revenues. Since the start of World War II, the federal government has had an outsized role in supporting research on American campuses. University leaders have warned in recent weeks that the Trump administration's tactics were endangering the nation's economic competitiveness.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a lot of money they're getting.
Yeah.
And if it's just pulled, as I talked about last week, if you guys missed the show, about how indirect costs work with federal grants, and it's really the lifeblood of universities.
Yeah. 18%. I mean, you know, what institution can take a 18% haircut and you know, not dramatically downsize?
Yeah, I mean they do have a rather large endowment, as the Ivy League schools do, but absolutely,
Right.
it's a blow to the head.
Yeah,
It's a blow
exactly.
to the head. Not fatal.
And some will be more able to survive it than others, but it's a mortal, it's a body blow to all of academia, to all of education.
Absolutely. And if you let someone extort you, they will continue to do so.
Right. That's a very important principle, right? Because we talked about, I think entitled the last show, the extortion regime, and he was the extortionist in chief. And that's exactly what the president is saying, President Eisgruber. He's saying, look, this is extortion. And if we give in on one thing, they're going to keep asking for other things. So he's calling the game for what it is. Well, you know, we had Joe Walsh on the other day, and he was saying that he thought that you and I were on the enemies list, but and actually my aunt was listening. She got very upset when she heard that you and I were on the enemies list. But he said he told us not to worry. He told us not to worry because, you know, we're way down. We're way down on the enemies list. We're really on the C list, and you know, we took a little umbrage to that. We were a little offended. You know, just you know.
No. I was relieved. You were offended. I was thrilled.
I mean, you know, like to think that we're accomplishing something here.
I like to think that I'm safe.
Like to think that you can come back from France and not be tortured in the airport, like the guy from Luxembourg. But you know, it turns out we weren't being paranoid, Harry. We weren't being paranoid because here's what Kash Patel had to say. Scary.
Those are just two examples.
There's Harry Segal and John Gartner. They are two Jews, and they have been having a show called Shrinking Trump, and we are going to go after them as soon as we possibly can with our fists.
Harry, was that you imitating Kash Patel?
John, are you accusing me of impersonating an FBI director? One with a really low IQ? Not to worry.
I just wanted to clarify because I don't want my aunt who listens to the show to think that I'm going to end up at a black site. Harry, we're very lucky today on this day, on this week that we have this special election to have Fred Hicks, who is a political strategist and political commentator. He's based in Georgia. He's the founder and president of the Hicks Evaluation Group, a consulting firm and a leading political strategist. He's been involved in nearly 300 campaigns across the country since 2006. He's appeared on CNN, MSNBC, Vox. I read him in the New York Times, Reuters. He was named one of the top 25 Atlantans. He lives in Atlanta, and one of the top 40 people under 40. So we're very lucky to have a real political strategist to talk politics with us on a week when some things have really happened in the electoral space.
As always.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I guess my first question is, should we be taking heart that we won the Supreme Court in Wisconsin and we lost both House seats by 15 points instead of the 30 points that Trump got on election day in those same districts? Should we be taking heart?
Yeah, I think we should. You know, in between presidential elections, you have midterms, and in between midterms, we have these special elections, and they seem to always give us an indication of how the country is leaning. And if we think about it, we're only about 6 months removed from the November election, right? A lot of people were heartbroken, dejected. And what we saw in that November election was that Donald Trump really didn't move the meter much from his 2020 performance, when he received 74 million votes. He received 76 this November. But what we saw in that one was that Democratic support, Democratic enthusiasm fell through the floor. So Kamala Harris and Tim Walz received about 9 million fewer votes than Biden and Harris did 4 years prior. And so what we're looking for when we get to these special elections, especially a statewide like Wisconsin, a state that Donald Trump flipped, is we're looking for a number of things. Number one, of course, a win. But beyond that, we're looking to see how Republicans would turn out and then how Democrats or non-Republicans would turn out. And what was interesting about Wisconsin is that Republicans matched their numbers, projected numbers for a special election. It was that the enthusiasm, whether it was driven by fear or whatever, or the reality of what America had done in November set in, was that the magic of Wisconsin is that Democratic numbers, enthusiasm was through the roof. And then when we look at the 2 congressional districts of Florida, and Florida is where I started my company in 2006, those two congressional districts are uber conservative. I mean, Florida's like the father of gentrified and gerrymandered communities, right? And so it's just interesting to see that these 2 districts that Trump and the 2 representatives who were in those areas, and they won by more than 30 points just 6 months ago, that support, that Republican support, dropped in half. And so these aren't winnable seats. But when you look at those 2 and you look at what happened in Wisconsin, that tells me that at least at this point right now, there's a lot about which to be encouraged. And I think, honestly, that's why Donald Trump decided to pull back the Stefanik nomination to the UN, because in a district that's a lot closer, like hers, that's one that they would have lost if these current trends were to hold.
And also, she's really annoying, so he probably just didn't want to have to talk to her.
I mean, there's that too, you know.
Harry lives in upstate New York. He was hoping to get rid of her.
Yeah.
Take her upstairs.
For sure. I mean, yeah, the UN, I think he thought it was maybe bury her over there, but it's she's a different kind of person. Yeah.
Now, Fred, I'm sure you've been asked this question many times, but we really thought that Kamala was going to win. And I really thought she was wonderful in so many ways. And yet, what happened? How do you see it?
So there were a few things. I mean, when you go back to July 21st, and I posted about this on my social media at the time, Biden was behind in every single swing state and in the national polls where there was 3, 6, or 9 points, right? That's why he dropped out. He wasn't even competitive at that point. And so when you look at the polls as of July 21st, and you look at how Kamala Harris performed in November of 2024, even though she lost, she actually overperformed nationally and in each of those, almost every one of those swing states from where Joe Biden was in July. Part of the problem was that the hole was so big that it was almost impossible for anyone to dig out of that in 100+ days. I mean, it was just, things were bad. We should have had a change much sooner, much earlier. So that's number one. But then number 2, the reason why Joe Biden was why he dropped out, right, is because the policies were unpopular. And I think the biggest mistake that Harris made, and it was embodied in that interview she did with The View, was when they asked her, what would you do different than Joe Biden? And she said, nothing. Well, if you weren't going to do anything different, then why do we need a different person? It wasn't just the messenger. The message and the messenger matters. And so, yeah, I think the way they ran the campaign, the way they moved, and I understand it was a tough position for her, but you have to get people different.
You know, it's interesting. It reminded me actually of 1968, long before you were born, as accomplished as you are, when Hubert Humphrey refused to break from Johnson. And he had to break on the war, and he didn't do it. And he waited so long that when he finally started to distance himself, he lost to Nixon. And I had that same feeling when she said that on The View, and I thought, she's her own person. Why couldn't she have said the many things I would do differently?
Absolutely. And I for one, am a person who believes that there were some very solid policy differences between she and President Biden. But, I don't know for sure. I read some speculation in July that part of the deal that with Biden dropping out and giving all of his support behind her was that she had to agree to take on his staff, and she did keep on a couple of his main people, which I thought was a mistake because you're not going to be able to break from ideas and strategy and ideology if you have the same people there, right? That's just not going to happen. And then I think with that, she felt prisoner, which I think was okay for the first 20, 30 days to not really do a lot of separation. But gosh, by the time we got around to the convention was, and I was at the convention was a perfect time to chart your own path and define yourself in your own way. Which then, to answer your question, leads to one other thing. And I've talked about this a little bit here and there, but I think this is important for our listeners to get this. Again, Donald Trump did not try at all to expand his reach, expand his, to cross over. His whole goal, his whole objective was to get every single one of those voters who voted for him in 2020 back out and then get people who skipped it to come out and vote for him. That was it. We, on the other hand, we were really fixated on this idea that we can get the swing voters. And at the convention, they kept talking about 200 Republicans, General Milley, all of them supporting Kamala Harris. And we gave the stage to Georgia's lieutenant governor, former lieutenant governor, Jeff Duncan. And the whole time I'm standing there on the floor, I'm on the floor at the convention, like, we're not taking care of our base. The base is angry. Two things, the base is angry and or apathetic. And we are here trying to reach across the aisle, and we haven't secured our own group. And listen, people can call it whatever they want to call it, but it's basic strategy. Even in the military, right? You take care of the base, right? All of us play these RPO games or whatever like that. You always secure the base, and then you go out into the field. We didn't do that. We didn't do that.
And at the end, Trump was able to make a play for African American men, for young white men, et cetera. So he actually started to add to the base toward the end. And
I want to pick up on that in the question I was going to ask, because you were quoted in the New York Times. It's very interesting that your son was getting a lot of pro-Trump literature, showing that they were micro-targeting African American young men. Now, I'm going to ask kind of a controversial question here. So my mother was one of the founders of the National Organization of Women in the early 70s. And it was her greatest wish before she died to see a female president. She didn't make it. She's dead. She didn't live to see Hillary run. She didn't live to see Kamala run. But she always said to me, they'll elect a black. She didn't see Barack Obama either. She didn't live to see him. She says they'll elect a black man before they'll ever elect a woman. You just don't understand how much people hate women. I mean, that was really like almost something she said repetitively over and over again. And so my question is, do the Democrats have a black man problem, or do we just have a man problem?
Well, first, your mom was right. If we look at the history of things, even the suffrage movement, right? So we know that Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony had a really interesting, started out with a good relationship with the Seneca Falls Convention. But then after that, Douglass broke away from that because he identified that America's not going to want to give women the right to vote. So if I want to get any group the right to vote, I've got to separate from that. And that caused a lot of tension.
Right? From these suffragettes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we saw the 13th, 14th. Yeah, you think about it. So we saw the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments in 1865. It wasn't until 1920 that we got the 20th Amendment. So it's about 60 years between that. So I think your mom was probably a fan of history, or knew her history very well. And so we see that sort of thing play out over and over. And I think that was the case. I mean, whether it was Hillary 2008 or Hillary 2016 or Kamala 2024. So there's part of that. But what's interesting, when we dig into the data, and I'm a demographer by training, at least here in Georgia, Kamala actually did really well. She only lost by 115,000 votes. So the margin, now again, that wasn't reflective of what happened in the country, but here in Georgia, it turned out to be a very winnable race. We just didn't manage the campaign right, whether you're talking about from the official campaign or what happened here in the state. But that being said, do we have a woman problem? I think America does, and it's very sad. It breaks my heart. I think that Kamala was very, very qualified. If you think about the two women who lost to Donald Trump, you think about their qualifications, right? So Hillary Clinton, senator, we'll put First Lady to the side, but her accomplishments as senator and as a Secretary of State, and the amount of things that she had to deal with instability in Northern Africa and just across the globe, she was extremely well qualified. Then you had Kamala Harris, who was a DA, who was an Attorney General, who was a U.S. Senator, and was the Vice President, also very well qualified, versus a failed businessman. Right. Well, he would say he wasn't a failed businessman. It's just his businesses, couldn't continuously file for bankruptcy. And then those that didn't, they took out lines of credit from Russia. But whatever, they're there. And so when you look at these comparisons, right, and that's why it's so funny to me when I hear them talk about, DEI hires. You are in office over two women who were way more qualified than you both times. In 2016 and 2024. So, Yeah, so America does have a problem with that, and I think the sooner that we're honest with ourselves about that, then the better off we will be. But I do want to say that I think the past can be prologue, right? And so we have to look at aside from we control for race, control for gender, and all those things there, we do have to look at the structural issues in the campaign. But this is where they come together. So to your point, in the New York Times in September, they covered my son and me. And it was interesting to me at the time that between September 1st, I think the 10th, he'd received 10 mailers from the Republican Party. On all of them, they were attacking Kamala Harris, calling her weak, and talking a bit about her policies. But during that time frame, he did not receive a single mailer or communication from the Democratic Party, National Democratic Party of Georgia, or from the Harris campaign. And then beyond the mailers that they talked about in the article, there was one other interesting thing. So he watches he's 24 this week, so he was 23 at the time. So he watches his college football on a streaming service. We share a YouTube TV account, and because he's my son, I do what I do. And it was the election season. It was the election season at the time. He made a chart of all the commercials that were on during college football. And this is, remember, this is beginning of September, so this is like the first and second week of college football. And so he was like, Dad, I saw a Trump commercial during every single break. I only saw one Harris commercial the entire time. Now, his mom, she watches figure skating on Peacock and all of that, or her streaming thing there. She's like, I see Harris ads all the time. They were not focused on this young black male, right, he's missed one election since he turned 18. And that's because he was off in college. It was a city election. But so he's had, I think 10 voting opportunities. So, and he's voted all of them except for one. He used to fly home for elections. He just happened to have a test that day so he could not come in for that one local election. But he did not. And even after that article came out, even after that, we still had about 2 months until the election. He still didn't get anything until towards the end. He received, there was an affiliate group that came by, knocked on the door, and left the door hanger. And so when I go back to this idea, guys, that you have to take care of the base first. Yes, black voters are a faithful voting bloc. Black women, the most faithful voting bloc. Black men, second most faithful voting bloc, the Democratic Party. But you can't take your votes for granted. And so when you are not talking at all, to a group, and someone else is talking to them incessantly, they at least are going to listen. And I believe the objective for the Trump campaign, and we saw it play out, they didn't care as much about flipping votes. I mean, if they flipped someone, great. What they wanted to do was to get people to skip the election, to stay home. And that's exactly what happened. Again, 9 million fewer votes in 2024 than 2020. And so that played out as across the board. And when I posted on my social media, and the article came out, so many people contacted the author. I think Maya King was the author of that, and then responded, I'll send it with my son, send it with my husband. And so I thought it was just young black men, but people's husbands, same thing, black men across the board, digital, getting mailer after mailer. Oh, I got that one too. Well, have you heard anything from Harris? Not a thing. Have you heard anything from the Georgia Democratic Party? Not a thing.
I'm not sure that Obama scolding black male voters was really helpful either. And he usually has a great ear, but I cringed at that.
Yeah, as did I. And so the thing about that is that, with all due respect to President Obama, a transformative figure, and what he accomplished in his 2008 campaign was amazing. But he has taken from the second part of his second term, really through his post-presidency, at least many black men feel that he is just, every time he talks to us, it is wagging the finger and saying something, be better fathers, pull your pants up, this, that, and the other. He never approaches it from the affirmative perspective. And that awareness, at least in the black male community, started when he gave an address at Morehouse College, an all historically black college, that's all male. And people are like, wait a minute, we're excited, you're here, you're giving this address, and the entire time you're lecturing young black men, and that created a real kind of problem. And so as he continued to do that in this election cycle, say, well, if you don't vote for her, then you have a problem. Wait a minute, dude. You cannot take that approach, because there were some legitimate concerns about some policy differences, policy points. Not that Trump was a good thing or a good option, but there were a lot of things that Black voters wanted to see happen. Listen, in 2020, I did a race to replace John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, our historic figure from the civil rights movement. He passed away due to pancreatic cancer. And so we had a special election in Georgia for his seat. I ran the campaign for the successful person, Kwanzaa Hall, or the person who won that seat, Kwanzaa Hall. And it was a short-term race because then that person, it was just to complete the unfinished term. And so he and I were in Midtown Atlanta one day, Kwanzaa, during the campaign. And a group of Black men walked up to us, and they didn't know which one of us was Kwanzaa, which one wasn't, right? And so they asked me, "Are you Kwanzaa Hall?" I'm like, "No, that's him right there." They're like, "Okay." They're like, "Well, listen, we're voting for Donald Trump." Because I was handing him yard signs, so it said Kwanzaa Hall for Congress. So they knew it was a political campaign, right? So we're just meeting in the parking lot, handing out signs. And they're like, "We're voting for Donald Trump." This is 2020, September 2020. And I was like, "All right, well, let's talk about it. Why?" And they said that, listen, the Democrats have been in power, been in charge, and they have, over the years, and they've never done anything to help us economically. I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, one guy said he served some time, and he wanted to start a business, and he was prohibited from accessing federal dollars to start a business. He's like, "So how am I supposed to take care of my family if I can't work, if I can't start a business?" The other two gentlemen, so there were three of them who came up. So the other two, they didn't have any kind of a record, or at least not that they discussed, but they all were talking about the same things: economic empowerment and the ability to feed their families and take care of their families. And they felt that the Democratic Party was emasculating them economically. And then also in the court system, they're like, "Listen, I want to see my kids, I want to spend time with my kids, and the system is so rigged against me." And Democrats are not hearing that. Democrats aren't talking about it. And they said, "Well," I said, "Well, when you think Trump is a better option," they talked about the First Step Act. They talked about the PPP loans and waiving fees to the SBA and all of that. So they were aware of policies, and they had some interesting and legitimate points. And so I said to Kwanzaa after that conversation, we were kind of doing a broad targeting of people with that one. We created a sub campaign after that. We were going up against a guy who had been the president of Morehouse College. All right. And so this is we had some long odds with that. And so we created a sub campaign based on that conversation that focused on Black men and those issues of economic empowerment, of course, so on and so forth. We won by about 1,000 votes, maybe 1,100 votes. It was a close race. But we won on the backs of the Black male voter over a guy who had been the president of Morehouse College, a Black male school, because he was talking about using sort of standard Democratic talking points. And we used that conversation to really drive a sub campaign. And so, we see these things playing out, but you can't take voters for granted. You just can't.
Right. So how do you think how would you estimate John Ossoff's chances of reelection? He's considered one of the most vulnerable senators. And if you were running his campaign, and maybe you are, I don't know, but if you were running his campaign, how would you instruct him to behave? What would be the message you would tell him to give, and how would you tell him to give it?
Yeah. So Senator Ossoff, he's running his seat is considered the most competitive, and it's the #1 targeted seat in the 26 cycle by both the NRSCs, the Republicans and the Democrats. They're both considered that. And the Republicans have already said they're going to put about $500 million into unseating him. And so if the Democrats match that, you're talking about somewhere between $900 million and $1 billion that's going to be flowing into Georgia around that Senate race, which is pretty much on par. There's about $980 million that was spent in the runoff in 2020 into 2021, where we elected Senator Ossoff the first time and Senator Warnock. So we've seen that kind of money before, but that's an ungodly sum for one state. You think about Kamala Harris at $1.5 billion for her entire campaign. You're talking about almost $1 billion is what he spent in Georgia alone. So for Senator, and so for Senator Ossoff, when we dig into the data, since 2020, we've seen a significant drop off in black voters, and particularly Black male voters, since the 2020 election. When we look at the data, I ran a C4 that was supportive of Senator Warnock in the 22 election. I was his debate prep partner in the 2020 election. And so what I saw in the data from the November 22 election was that we had almost 300,000 Black voters alone. We're not talking about Hispanic or AAPI voters, Black voters alone who voted in the November Biden-Trump election or the 21 runoff who skipped every other election after that, including that November 22 election where Stacey Abrams was on the ballot. And so that for me was a harbinger, right, or a bellwether that, hey, we had some trouble on the horizon. But Herschel Walker was such a bad candidate, and we had a lot of tailwinds, helping us out there that we were able to win that special. But then the next year, I ran a race in the city of Atlanta, which of course is a super Democratic city, and in that race, which was a citywide election, we had a tax item on there, and we had a school board election, and we had, let's say, there were about 49,000 people who we were considered to be super voters, so people who just never miss an election. Well, we only had about 28,000 people vote in that election, which meant that 21,000 super voters skipped. I mean, people who had voted in the last 5 elections were like, I'm not going to do it. And so I did an interview and wrote some pieces at the time that, hey, 24 is going to be bad. When you have people in the city of Atlanta, a very Democratic city, sitting out the election, an off-year election, right? Yeah. But that's why I'm excited to go back to the first question about what we saw in the special elections this week. So, because Democratic enthusiasm is back, and we saw these areas in Wisconsin, in the two congressional seats in Florida, and so there are some signs early on that that 26 could be a good year, and that's going to be really important because Jon Ossoff is going to need every bit of support. So, to your question, I would encourage him to take care of the base, number one. And he can do that by running against Trump. And he's already starting to do that. And I'm calling it the Ossoff Gambit. So, hey, y'all heard it here first, the Ossoff Gambit, right? In Georgia, you typically try to focus on Georgia-based issues and how you've delivered for Georgia. But he has to run against Donald Trump, and he's already starting to do that. So you can talk about how a lot of things in Georgia, but everything has to be tied to Donald Trump. Listen, the CDC is based right here. And so we've seen, all these layoffs, right? So the CDC has basically, people feel like it doesn't exist. It's almost in name only as of this week, right? And that's affecting Georgia and Georgians. Across the board, when you're talking about DOD cuts and you're talking about FAA cuts and all these other federal organizations, Georgia has a lot of federal money and a lot of federal jobs in it. And so when you talk about what running against Donald Trump, that is in essence running for Georgia. And that's what happened in the 2 congressional races in Florida. Both of those districts have a lot of federal money. And the one in the first district that Matt Gaetz had, right, that's Escambia County, Pensacola. Yeah, it's a heavy military base, right? You used to have one of the largest naval installations there. So you have a lot of veterans and all of that. And for the first time since 1960, I just read this morning, for the first time since 1960, or the 60s, Escambia County, where Pensacola is, voted Democrat. First time. And so when you look at a state like Georgia, where you have all these military bases in Columbus and Augusta, you had like 4 or 5 around Metro Atlanta. And I was a military kid, so I used to, Georgia was a big thing. That really serves as a good foundation for the kind of campaign that Ossoff should run. I think the other part about that, so the Ossoff Gambit running against Trump, really making this appeal to fighting for Georgians who are impacted by what Donald Trump is doing, has done. The second thing, and I think Senator Ossoff is very much focused on this, is looking at ways to motivate and really get Black turnout up in next year's election. The good thing for Senator Ossoff is that in addition to his race, we have an open race for governor, because the current governor, who's very popular, is term limited out. So you're going to have an open race for governor, an open race for attorney general, because the attorney general is running for governor, and you'll probably have a few other open seats. So there will probably be some high-profile African-American candidates, a la Senator Warnock when Ossoff was elected the first time, who can help turn out the vote. And so there are some things, I think, structurally that are kind of falling into place that are good for Senator Ossoff, but it's going to take everything to hold on to that seat.
It's interesting. I talked about running against Trump before, to protect democracy. But what you're saying now is you can run against Trump because you're losing your jobs. In other words, now you can lose your economic pain to run against. When people were saying, we got to save democracy, that's so abstract. They didn't
so abstract.
Actually, we did need to save democracy. But now that these people, and I know actually people in Georgia, some of whom were Trump voters, who are going, I can't believe what's happening to the CDC. This is insane.
But listen, guys, and Fred, I'm so sorry. We're just about out of time, right, John? But And Fred, you've been such a great guest. It's gone by so quickly. But I just wanted to add to your Ossoff gambit, which is, I think Trump is going to crash the economy. I think inflation is come roaring back, and it's going to be so much. Well, it's sad to say, but it's going to be so much easier.
I think so.
Right?
I'm borderline bullish on winning, on having a good sweep of, maybe I shouldn't say sweep, but a good run next year. I ran some data last night in anticipation of our interview. And so I looked at all of our general elections in Georgia from 2020 on, because COVID, was a big shift, right? So if you look at the 2020 election on, if we include the Stacey Abrams vote, so I included every statewide election in there. If we include Stacey Abrams totals, and I say that because her 22 campaign was a bad campaign. She lost by 7.5 points, and that's the worst performance of any Democrat out there. Well, if you include her, we have 5 elections, and Democrats have won 3, Republicans have won 2. And if you include her, Republicans have about 50.3% of the votes that were cast, and Democrats 49.7. If you take her out, then that flips. So what that means, y'all, and that means to our listeners, is that Georgia is a true toss-up state. It's basically 50-50 since COVID. And so that means that Senator Ossoff has a great chance. He's the incumbent. And looking at to your point about all the things that are the environment in which the election is going to happen, he has a really good chance of winning. But we have a good chance not just of getting that, but of getting the governor's mansion for the first time since 2002, and perhaps some other seats as well. And so I'm getting excited about 2026.
That's great. Well, I appreciate you getting excited, and we have a lot of doom and gloom here on Shrinking Trump. So more than half coming from this side of the screen, and so I'm really delighted to hear not only your optimism, but to hear that it's data based. And I think what's interesting is, we were optimistic. We actually weren't looking at the data. We were actually standing on a rotted floor, is what you're saying. So we were kind of like, woohoo, actually, we were moving on down. And now what you're saying is kind of in the inverse situation, which is things look dire, but actually they're better. The data, underlying data, shows it looks better than it is. So that's the good news. The only bad news is we're all going to have to become impoverished for this.
Impoverished and endangered, and we can't really travel abroad because they're checking phones and making life difficult to re-enter the country. We might not have any friends across the world anymore, and those kind of things like that. But hey, November 2026 is coming.
Well, thank you for the good news and the bad news from a rational data perspective for someone who's got his feet on the ground there in Georgia.
Well, listen, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. And I do want to say again to our listeners, continue the work of resisting, even if our leadership is not giving us what we want and what we hope for, in terms even on the Democratic side. The fact that you're showing up, that you're calling Congress, you're showing up to these town halls and all of that, you're making your voices heard, is making a difference, and they're noticing that. And so I know it's very tempting to sit out of frustration, out of fear, and out of despair. But this is not the time to disengage. This is the time to engage, to double down, and to take our country back, to take our democracy back, to take our economy back. So I'll just encourage everyone who's listening to please be hardened and don't give up. Stay in the fight, please.
Well, listen, don't be a stranger. We'd love to have you back to hear the progress you're seeing.
Listen, anytime y'all call, I will answer and be there. So I look forward to being back.
Thank you so much, Fred. It's really been great having you.
Thank you. The pleasure's been mine. Take care.
Take care. Well, it's really nice to hear some rationally based good news for a change.
Absolutely. John and I were trained to do data analysis in graduate school. That's what psychologists do. And I just love the fact that he called himself a demographer. That's music to my ears.
So basically, the longer the bread line, the longer the voting line.
Yes. Absolutely. I think that's always been true.
Yeah. Okay. So, Harry, we've gotten to the shrink wrap portion of the show. What did we learn today?
Here's what I think, John, that we learned today, or maybe this is something I hope we learned today. It's a horrible image, but in war, neighborhoods, villages, cities are bombed. And sometimes houses are just reduced to rubble. Buildings collapse. Sometimes buildings keep standing but then they collapse later. And sometimes buildings remain standing with enough structure so if the war stops, that building can be saved, can be reclaimed, it can be rebuilt. I think we're watching the democratic order of our country is like one of those buildings. It has not been reduced to rubble, still standing, but we don't know how much permanent damage was done, whether it will withstand more of this assault. And we are starting to see signs of resistance. Very eloquent Cory Booker, tagging his resistance to a tradition of what he called good trouble, quote from the late John Lewis. And I think we all have to be wondering and hoping that this sort of house of democracy will stand. And we don't know.
Yeah. So, look, it's mostly bad news. There is some good news. I think our guest did provide us a glimmer of hope. He keeps saying that we're pretending to be pundits and pretending to be financial advisors, but we're really not. Well, he is an actual political operative, and he is looking at actual data, and he has actual experience on the ground. And really what he's saying to us is interesting, is things were much worse than we knew they were before the 2024 election. We were in much thinner ice than we ever realized. But the inverse is true now, that actually there is a reason to take heart from some of these special elections. There is some kind of shift going on in the country as people are starting to come to terms with the fact that this is catastrophic for them. And that is only going to increase as the economic pain becomes more evident. Unemployment, inflation, right? These are the kind of things that bad stock market. These are the kind of things that hit people where it hurts in their pocketbook, because it is the economy.
Exactly. And the tariffs really cover the whole country. It's not just, the steel sector or the car sector. It's everything. It's everything.
So the good news is the good news is the bad news is so bad. It's so bad that it might produce some good news in reactance, right? In resistance.
Absolutely. And what I've been saying, and you've been saying for months now, is there's a race between Trump's psychopathology that will destroy himself, because if everything he thinks is right and true, and anyone saying it's not true makes them an enemy, then he's going to destroy everything. That's how it works. And the question is, will he destroy the economy before he destroys our institutions?
And
it's
before
a race between those two things.
And before he destroys and takes control of our electoral system. Right? I mean, that's what he's really banking on, is his ability to manipulate and rig the election, even though he's impoverishing half the country or more.
Right, exactly.
But I feel this week, though, is also a very sober time, because the stuff that we went over about the police state, that the police state is here, and that the way these immigrants are being treated is lawless and cruel and persecutory and I don't want to say genocidal, because that's too strong, but it has that aspect of persecuting a whole people, right? And actually, some people do consider mass expulsion a form of genocide. So we're here. We're here. And I really am reminded of that. I wish I could remember who said it. Maybe someone will remind me. But the person who said, when they came for the Jews, I said nothing because I wasn't a Jew. When they came for the communists, I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. When they came for the intellectuals, I said nothing because I wasn't an intellectual. And then when they came for me, there was nobody to say anything left to say anything. I just want the American people to really, if you don't remember anything I've ever said, listen to this, okay? If they're sweeping people off the streets, none of us are safe. None of us are safe. It's another one of those situations of either we hang together or we hang separately. And so, yes, I'm very disappointed in Johns Hopkins saying, don't interfere with the ICE agents. No, we should all be interfering with the ICE agents. That's what I'm saying. We should be coming together to protect these people. I mean, as citizens, as houses of worship and religious institutions, as civic institutions, as educational institutions, as legal institutions, as financial institutions. We all need to be banding together to protecting the rule of law means protecting people. It's not just protecting institutions. And so it's very disappointing that things have already gotten to this point and nobody's really pushing back. Nobody's interrupting this process.
They're starting to. They're starting
Well,
to.
I hope so. I hope
It's
so.
only been 70 something days. Let's see.
Yeah. But it's already progressed to a level that should be unacceptable to all civilized nations.
Oh, John, I couldn't agree with you more. So, John, how have you been doing this week with all of this terrible stuff happening and all the anxiety?
Well, I'm glad you asked because I had a really creepy nightmare last night. I dreamed that you and I were abducted and sent to an El Salvadoran prison.
Oh, what happened?
Well, it got me thinking. I've been kind of obsessing about this. Like, what if that actually happened? How would we survive?
Well, we'd have to use our wits.
I guess so. Or maybe our wittiness. How about that? Listen, Harry, Jewish vaudeville humor, it never goes out of style. It's like a universal language. I'm telling you, they'll get it.
Well, I mean, I've always loved Jack Benny and George Burns and Myron Cohen. It is kind of at the basis of all American humor. I mean, if you want to be, erudite about it, but it's great stuff. I don't know. How would it work? I mean, how would we even use our wittiness to survive?
Well, I think we should be prepared. Maybe we might need to practice a little bit, but
Okay.
I think we would just, at some place where the prisoners are assembled, we would just jump in front of the audience and say, hello, hey, everybody. I'm John, and this is Harry. Hey, anybody here disappeared from Toledo? Oh.
I told this ICE agent, take my wife, please. And he did.
Oh, it's not going over too well.
No, I keep going, John. You can do the next one.
Okay, well, hey, a guard asked this gang member, this prisoner, are you a gang member? And he said, no. And he said, are you sure you're not a gang member? And he said, no. He said, come on, I know you're a gang member. And finally says, okay, I'm a gang member. He says, oh, that's funny. You don't look gangish.
Look, a guard knocked on his cell door and asked, does prisoner 396 live here? And the guy said no. And the guard said, aren't you prisoner 396? And he said, sure. But you call this a living? And sure enough, the next day he was found dead.
Yeah, that's not good. Hey, wait a minute. Hey, try this one, guys. An American Jewish prisoner is stabbed 14 times. And as he's bleeding out, the guard says, are you comfortable? And he said, I made a living.
You suck. Well, we're here for the rest of our lives, or at least till the end of next week, whichever comes first. So don't forget to tip your corrections officer.
I think you better dance off the stage, Harry, before they kill us.
Bye, folks. We hope to see you next week. We need your help. Come back. Make sure you come back to Shrinking Trump. Be well.